I'm Lauren Fordyce, an IPM educator with UC IPM, and thank you for joining us today. We are excited to have presenting today Karey Windbiel-Rojas. Karey is the Associate Director for Urban and Community IPM with UC IPM, and she is an Urban IPM Advisor for Yolo, Solano, and Sacramento counties. As Associate Director, Karey provides leadership and coordinates communication and educational efforts to address urban pest issues around homes, structures, landscapes, gardens, schools, and public areas. Thank you for joining us, Karey. You may now go ahead and share your slides.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. As Lauren said, I am going to be talking to you today about protecting pollinators and wildlife with some new laws in California. There is quite a bit of information to share with you today, so I may be going a little fast, but I do hope to leave room for questions at the end. And joining us today is Neve Quinn, who can also answer some questions about these new laws. So today we are going to cover just very briefly about IPM to make sure we're all in the same understanding of why we're talking about pesticides. I am going to talk about two new laws that came into effect January 1st of 2025, how these laws may affect you, and then share some resources for you for managing pests and finding more information about these laws and other things. I am not going to cover bee health and biology today. There is no time for that because that is a webinar in itself. I can also not cover all pesticides as a whole, so we just will be talking about two groups of pesticides. And we also don't have time today to cover individual pests and answer questions on individual pests, but we will be sharing resources on where you can find that information. And this is an introduction to these laws. There is much more to be read and many questions that may arise. So we may not have time to get into absolutely everything about these laws. All right, so to start with, remember, if you have joined us before, what integrated pest management is. It's a more sustainable way to manage pests that involves scientific study and ecosystem-based approaches that will hopefully reduce any risk to people, non-target organisms, and the environment. And integrated pest management, or IPM, involves a combination of practices for long-term management. And these practices or components are things like identifying your pest first before any action is taken, monitoring for how many of the pests you might have, where they are, what the damage is. And then when you need some sort of control methods, using these control components here, cultural controls, which is manipulating the habitat that might favor the pest or favor the plant, using physical or mechanical controls to squish or trap or exclude a pest, using naturally occurring biological control, such as predators and parasites, to control the pests for you, and also chemical control or pesticides can be a part of integrated pest management. So from that point, what we're going to be talking about today are two laws dealing with pesticides. So I just want to mention that as part of IPM, we do have chemical control as an option. We always want to encourage folks to use non-chemical controls first, but in some cases, chemical control may be necessary. And that is why we do talk about pesticides as part of your IPM practices. So the best time to use chemical control might be for a very severe pest infestation, or for a pest with public health concerns like we're going to talk about today, or when other non-chemical approaches have not been successful. And when pesticides are used, we do encourage less toxic products. So in understanding pesticides a little bit, I also want to share that there are regulators who regulate pesticides in California and in the United States. At the University of California, we are educators, we are not regulators, but we do need to share information with our various audiences to make sure that you understand your role and also what is being put into law and into practice, and that you comply with these laws. So we are sharing that the Environmental Protection Agency of the United States registers pesticides in the United States. Now, state by state, there are different regulatory agencies that also will register and regulate pesticides. For California, that is the California Department of Pesticide Regulation. Not all pesticides are registered. Some are exempt from registration, which I'm not going to get into today. But there are various audiences that are licensed and some who are not, but all of us have a role to play in following the laws. And these laws are enforced by the California Department of Pesticide Regulation and also locally by the county agricultural commissioners. Now, jumping straight into the laws, both of these laws that I'll talk about today went into effect January 1st of 2025. Some of these are building upon older laws and older regulation, and I'm going to do my best to explain that. The first law to understand is a limitation of outdoor uses of a category of pesticides called neonicotinoids, which are insecticides. And I'm going to explain a little bit about the neonicotinoids and some familiar products and also what the law means. So neonicotinoids are a class of pesticides that mimic nicotine. Nicotine has been used for centuries for insect control. And so the neonicotinoids, which means a new nicotine-like product, acts on these nicotinic receptors in the body of the insect and their nervous system, causing them to fire rapidly. And the insect will eventually get paralyzed and die. So that kind of makes them very useful and effective against our insects. Neonicotinoids have historically been used against sucking insects, and I'll explain that here shortly, and some chewing insects, as well as some topical flea control products that we use for pets. That should say pets, not pests. So neonicotinoid insecticides, they are formulated either as soil drenches. So you can see in the picture, he is applying it at the base of a tree to go into the soil and into the roots of the plant. Some neonicotinoid products are formulated as foliar sprays that you spray on the foliage. Either way, the pesticide gets absorbed into the plant either through the roots or the leaves and travels through the plant systemically. And it gets absorbed and incorporated into all parts of the plant, including the leaves and flowers, and also pollen and nectar. Neonicotinoids have been used for severe infestation, for invasive species, and also for really large plants like large trees that you can't easily spray with a contact type of pesticide. It may take several weeks, but usually one application will last for months and sometimes even years. Now, they have been used very successfully, but when they are not used properly, there could be more exposure to our pollinators and other non-targets, which is part of the reason for this law. But when used properly, there is also less exposure to humans and non-targets. And I'll talk about how they will and will not be able to be used with this new law. Some of the pests that are controlled by neonicotinoids include some of our sucking insects. Many of these sucking insects produce a really sticky honeydew or sap that can be very messy around our gardens, landscapes, city streets, schools, sidewalks, wherever there's a drippy mess. And I'll show you a picture of one that I've encountered locally. And so what happens is these sucking insects, they have a mouth part that is a tube-like or a needle-like mouth part. They pierce the plant and then they suck out the sap or the plant juices. And then their waste product is what we term honeydew because it's sticky. And so this honeydew can drip all over plants underneath and areas and patio furniture underneath the plant, causing a lot of mess. And that's one reason why people want to control these pests, is because they do make quite a bit of mess. Some examples of honeydew producers are aphids, certain scales called soft scales, whiteflies, psyllids, mealybugs, and certain leaf hoppers. So here is a picture in a local park, and honeydew is really hard to take a picture of, but if you can kind of see this picture on the right where there looks like little beads and it's shiny, this whole plant, this whole big tree, and there was a line of these trees in the park. Those from Sacramento may recognize this as William Land Park, absolutely covered in sticky honeydew. And if you were to touch the leaves, your hand would be stuck. Some of the leaves get stuck together. So it can be a really big landscape problem. This picture in the middle looks like it's from irrigation that has made the walkway wet. It is not wet. This is sticky honeydew that has dripped down from the plants, from the trees that cover this area. And as I was walking, my feet were getting stuck, kind of like it, just stuck. Anyway, so that's part of the problem with these pests, and one of the reasons why neonicotinoid pesticides have been useful and effective, because they go into the whole canopy of the plant. However, neonicotinoids have been under scrutiny in the US and other countries for many years. Some other countries have already restricted their use or banned them outright. Neonics can come in many different kinds of formulations, including liquids, granules, dusts, and packages. I will show you momentarily some products that you may be familiar with. But there are over 400 products containing a neonicotinoid active ingredient for sale in the United States, not necessarily in California, but they have a pretty wide use both in agriculture and around gardens and landscapes, and for indoor and on pet products. Now, because the neonicotinoids do get incorporated into all parts of the plant, as I said, including pollen and nectar, the problem with them has been that certain of our pollinators, our non-target species that we don't consider pests, have been exposed to them. And this isn't an exhaustive list of pictures of all pollinators, just an example. But neonicotinoid pesticides are especially toxic to honeybees and other bees, but they can also reduce the lifespan and the health of butterflies and moths, our parasitic wasps that help us with pest control, and some of these other non-insect organisms can get a dose of the pesticide. So that's part of the reason that led to the regulation. So neonicotinoid active ingredients are what you would see on a pesticide label. You're not going to see the term neonicotinoid. You're going to see the active ingredients, including these 5, which are registered in California. And I will pronounce them for you. Imidacloprid is one of the more frequently encountered active ingredients in some of our home and garden products. You can see some example products here that may contain one of these active ingredients. So imidacloprid, clothianidin, dinotefuran, thiamethoxam, and acetamiprid. These are the active ingredients that you would see on the label, and these are all under the neonicotinoid pesticide grouping. So some example products, and again, this is just partial to give you some context. Some of our 12-month tree and shrub products that you may be familiar with from BioAdvanced, formerly called Bayer. Merit, which many people know. Safari is also a professional use product, and there's others. And then some of the granules, and also this ortho fruit flower, fruit and vegetable insect killer. So just an example of products. So what this new law states is that starting January 1st, 2025, most householders, so anyone living, renting, owning a home, are prohibited from purchasing or using any neonicotinoid pesticide on outdoor trees, turf grass, lawns, or ornamental plants on their property. The only people who will be able to use neonicotinoid pesticides as of a couple of weeks ago are those licensed professionals who hold a license of the qualified applicator certificate or license in the state of California with the category A or category B. If you're licensed, you know what this means. If you're not licensed, what that means is you cannot use neonicotinoids anymore. You can hire someone to use them on your property, but you yourself are not allowed to use neonicotinoids. So to further drill down on this, we're talking about outdoor applications, and that includes people who work at a retail nursery and the application to nursery stock. That is not going to be allowed. Outdoor applications to ornamental plants. So anything in the landscape around your home, residence, school, libraries, businesses, any outdoor application. Also outdoor application on any trees. That includes ornamental trees as well as fruit and nut trees around homes and residents. And you see these non-production, this is specifying that we're not talking about agriculture. And I don't have time to get into agriculture, but last year they had a restriction further put onto the agricultural use of neonicotinoids. So it's not just home use that's being targeted. So it's just further regulation. And also no outdoor applications to turf grass in non-agricultural use settings. So what this law really is saying is outdoor use on outdoor ornamental plants. Now, it does not include indoor uses of these products. So there are some neonicotinoid products that are used against ants or cockroaches or maybe some for bed bugs. Those are not affected by this new law and can still be used against those pests indoors. It also does not include on-pet products for controlling fleas and ticks. And also, and this is where it's a little confusing, it does not apply, and this is directly from the text, does not apply to backyard fruit and vegetable gardens, not fruit trees. You cannot use neonicotinoids on fruit trees, but fruit and vegetable gardens, such as berries, grapes, melons, and tomatoes, or other types of fruit. And again, the law does apply to fruit and nut trees. And so again, anyone who is a householder, you can use neonicotinoids against pests on your vegetables, but not on any fruit-bearing trees or ornamentals, unless you possess a California license in the qualified applicator certificate or license series. Okay. Here is a label, and this is where it might get a little confusing. This is a label for that ortho flower, fruit, and vegetable product. And here you can see acetamiprid is the active ingredient. So again, you don't see the term neonicotinoid on the label. You see the actual active ingredient. It does the label, which I know everyone who comes to our webinars, you know very well you should be reading labels. So on the label, it does say applying this product with rain, this pesticide is toxic to wildlife. This product is toxic to bees exposed to direct treatment. Do not apply when bees are visiting. You should always read the label to make sure that you're aware of the potential consequences of an item. So the label has stated the bee toxicity for years because that's mandatory. So this label does list a whole bunch of vegetables, which you can still use this product on vegetables, but you cannot now use it on any citrus trees or any of the other listed fruit-bearing trees. Okay, so even if the label lists it, you are not allowed to use it any longer in California. And I'm not certain what this, what the manufacturers are going to do as far as making products available to California, they may change their labels, but most pesticide labels are written for the United States as a whole, not state by state, because we all have different regulations. So this is one question from, there's the URL on this page, which leads to the California Department of Pesticide Regulation website, which contains all of this language. This is one question that I pulled out from a very long list of questions and answers that they have. So what should you do with any neonicotinoid pesticide products that you have stored in your garage, your cabinet, your shed? What you need to do with the pesticide is not use it anymore. But if it has not been opened, you can possibly return it to the store where you bought it, or return it online if you bought it online, if it has not been opened. If it has been opened, you should take it to your local household hazardous waste site, and they will dispose of it properly. Okay, so if you have it, you're not allowed to just use up what you have. You have to not use it anymore and to turn it into your waste disposal. Do not throw it in the trash. That is also going to potentially expose wildlife to them. Never throw any pesticides in the trash. There are also questions about online sales. So what is going to happen, and hopefully has happened at most retail stores, is that they are not allowed to have these products for sale to consumers anymore. Licensed professionals can buy neonicotinoid products, but they have to go through a certified pesticide dealership. So our local hardware stores and box stores and other stores should not have these products on their shelves anymore, and that will be enforced by the California Department of Pesticide Regulation and our local ag commissioners. And so hopefully you won't see them. And that again is for any outdoor use except for on vegetables. Then online, retailers should not be selling them to any address in California. I tried to find one and buy one yesterday. So I went to a product that contained one of these on my account, and it said, this item cannot be shipped to your location. So some retailers are definitely complying with this law and they know about it, but I would imagine that there are other dealerships that have not quite gotten the memo yet. And DPR is in charge of enforcing it for online sales too. All right, switching over to the other law I want to share with you. This is also effective January 1st, 2025, and it's a further restriction on rodenticides. And Neve, you can jump in and say anything you want to correct me on. I may call on you too to clarify, because as Neve knows, and I now know, this is really complicated stuff. So I just want to give a quick rodent and rodenticide 101, that rodents are not just rats and mice, but also squirrels, woodchucks, chipmunks, porcupines, nutria, and beavers. So this is the whole group of rodents that we're talking about with rodenticides. Rodents, they are wildlife. They are part of our ecosystem. They are part of our food web. So they do have a role to play in nature, but sometimes they are pests and may require control because they damage our crops. They can infest our homes and other buildings. They can eat our backyard fruit, or they can cause other kinds of ecological damage. So when rodents are considered pests, that's when we might want to control them. But rodents and other wildlife are not inherently pests until they do become a pest to you. So there are several reasons why we want to manage rodents, and I'm sorry to show this gross picture without any warning, but this was a picture that Neve provided to me from a rodent that had been stuck on a glue board that remained where it was for a while, and it may have been at a school or another site where she had been called for, consultation. But you can see all the little things around this. Those are maggots, and maggots were kind of dropping from the ceiling where these rats had been dead. And the rats in a school or any public building or in our house can cause public health concerns, but also those maggots dropping from the ceiling is quite disgusting. And that's in our schools, and nobody wants that. So there are definitely reasons to manage rodents. There's also lots of documentation, and I'm just going to quickly go through here. Some of you may or may not know that there is a association between rodents and asthma, that the proteins in a rodent's body can trigger asthma, asthma attacks, but also can cause asthma in young children. And so having rodents around is not something that we want to have in our schools or homes or anywhere. They can also carry other diseases. And so it becomes a public health concern when we have rodents in an area that can lead to diseases in our communities. And so here are just a few different reasons why. And also we've seen on the news lots of reports of rat infestations that are a public health concern because they carry disease and they get around our homes, that the populations can grow really, really fast. And for those of you who've come to some of our previous webinars, Dr. Quinn has shared with you how fast a rodent population can build up if left uncontrolled. And so again, here are just some news articles and some diseases like typhus that they can infest us with. So lots of reasons that we want to control rodents, and the plague is something that we are concerned of. It's not prolific around California, but there are cases of human plague in California and caused by carried by the fleas that can be on the rodents. All right, so quickly on rodenticides. Rodenticides are pesticides designed to kill rodents. They are usually formulated as bait to attract these target animals. And many rodenticides stop their normal blood clotting, and those are called anticoagulants. But rodents, humans, dogs, cats, all mammals can be affected by rodenticides because our bodies work in similar ways. So, you know, there is exposure and risk to all of us from rodenticides, to all animals, but the rodent has to eat the material in order to be affected by it. And rodenticides can also affect birds, which are not mammals. There is a fact sheet that will be part of our references and resources that we send out later, where you can read more about rodenticides. But very briefly, I wanted to talk about some of these terms. The anticoagulants that I just mentioned make up the majority of the rodenticides for which these laws have been targeting. But there are other rodenticides that are not considered anticoagulants because they work in a different way. Those are considered acute toxicants. So you may have seen these terms, first generation, second generation, but they're also referred to as single dose or multiple dose rodenticides. So this first generation, termed FGAR in some of our materials and some things that you'll see, are the single dose. And the active ingredients that are in this group are also hard to pronounce, but I'll do my best. They include brodifacoum, bromadiolone, difenacoum, and diphenthiolone. And then in the second generation, or the multiple dose, multiple feeding, are warfarin, chlorfacinone, and difacинone. So we're going to talk about those with this law, but there are other rodenticides that include zinc phosphide, bromethylene, cholecalciferol, and strychnine. All of these are registered in California. And there are others that may not be registered in California. And if you come across anything, you should not use any of these rodenticides. The reason why this new law is in effect, and several other laws before this new law that I'll talk about, is because of the impact of rodenticides on wildlife, on non-target organisms. Some organisms can be exposed and poisoned through primary poisoning, meaning they eat the rodenticide, they feed on it. But then there's also secondary poisoning, where they feed on an animal that has fed on another animal or has eaten the rodenticide. So certainly we've all heard about impacts on wildlife from rodenticides, and it has been documented. Many different animals have been documented to have some rodenticides in their system. Whether they have died from them or not, there may still have been pesticides in their system. And so we certainly do not want to harm any wildlife, but at the same time, rodents still need to be controlled when they are becoming a pest, especially in our urban areas and our public areas. So who is responsible for rodenticide exposure to wildlife in California? We all have a role to play, as I mentioned before. So folks that may be controlling wildlife and applying rodenticide include structural pest management professionals who are licensed by the state of California, both by the Structural Pest Control Board and the Department of Pesticide Regulation. They are trained and they are licensed, and they have to take continuing education to continue to hold their license. They are trained to know how to properly apply pesticides, including rodenticides. There's also vector control agents that are licensed by the California Department of Pesticide Regulation to control public health pests and other kinds of vectors of diseases. Oops. And then there's all the rest of us, consumers who are untrained and unlicensed and sometimes uneducated on pesticide application, calibration, exposure, consequences. And so all of these folks have been able to apply rodenticides. And from this reason, we are finding some of this exposure and some of these new laws. So a pest control professional would apply a pesticide for the target organism, and perhaps it is fed upon by a predator. Dr. Quinn has been doing a lot of studies to see the pathway of what other animals are eating rodents. And some of the ones that we hear about, like mountain lions and bobcats and coyotes, had not been known to consume rodents directly. But and some just, mountain lions don't really eat rodents. And Neve, if I'm not saying that correctly, please jump in and correct me. But so there is a pathway that Neve and her colleagues have been looking at to see how rodenticides have been moving through our food chain, and trying to get a handle on how some of these animals are exposed to rodenticides. So when applied properly, the rodent gets exposed, and hopefully no other secondary exposure happens. Excuse me. There we go. But there may be that in our legal applications that there's exposure, but there may also be some illegal application, or illegal or non-target access to some of the rodenticides from our wildlife. So there are still some unknown questions that Neve and her colleagues are trying to look into on the pathway of how these other wildlife get exposed to the rodenticide. And so again, a licensed professional, they are going to legally and correctly apply the pesticides. Sometimes things happen, but they are licensed and they are trained. But what ends up happening a lot in our urban areas by consumers is we are not trained, and we put out pesticides, maybe not in a bait station, maybe not securely. We have lots of pictures of bait blocks and little piles of pesticides that are just put out there, that someone without a license may be causing exposure to all kinds of wildlife, both primary poisoning or secondary poisoning by the misapplication. So, why is it that a rabbit would have a rodenticide? Because rabbits aren't eating rats and mice. why is it that a skunk would have a rodenticide in their system? Because they're also not feeding on these. So all these arrows just show it's kind of complicated, but the illegal or the misapplication of rodenticide by folks who are not trained or knowledgeable in it has contributed to some of our known exposure. And as I mentioned, there are all of those active ingredients that are registered in California, and there's a whole bunch of rodenticides and pesticides that are not registered in California that someone could fairly easily buy online. This is a nice pile that Neve had been holding on to, of things that she was able to buy illegally. Obviously, she's not using them, but able to buy these illegally through online sales. And some of them came in just little baggies like this with no instructions and no application, and sometimes no active ingredients. So, what are they? Some of these even are not in English. And so it's really hard to know how to apply them correctly. But most of these are not registered in California. Some do have active ingredients that are registered, but we do have access to things that we shouldn't have. And so don't buy anything online. But anyway, the laws that had been in effect prior to the recent law has aimed to restrict the availability and use of many of these first generation and second generation and acute toxicants. So this is just a short list of recent laws that affected rodenticides that may have been signed or passed in one year, and then they get enacted in the prior year. And many of these get put forth to our legislature through assembly bills. And I won't get into all the nitty-gritty on that, but basically this one restricted the use of the second generation anticoagulant rodenticides, including these active ingredients here. Another one in 2023 further restricted difascinone. And then our recent one that we're talking about today is a restriction on pretty much all of the first generation and second generation to limit their use. So most uses of these rodenticides have been prohibited, and only those who are licensed and mostly public health officials can use these for the need for public health concerns. So this recent law in 2025 further restricted the chlorfascinone and warfarin. Difascinone had been restricted last year, so the other two in these multi-feed rodenticides are now further restricted. So they are prohibited by use and for sale. They can only be sold by a licensed pest control dealer, and they were already needing to be sold by licensed pest control dealer, but there's further restrictions, and it is unlawful to use these products. So there's lots of sections in these laws, but I wanted to just show you how the law is stated, and that basically householders, homeowners, residents, consumers cannot use these materials. And this is just more language on the use, but pretty much the first generation and the second generation anticoagulant rodenticides cannot be used around our homes and residences and most industrial and institutional sites, with some exceptions, but very few exceptions. So one of the questions from the DPR website that I pulled out here, and there are many more questions and answers also on that website, is kind of the same as the neonicotinoids. Will retailers be allowed to sell their existing stock of these products, which is sometimes allowed, but in this case, no. Any retailers that do still have products containing chlorfascinone or warfarin will not be able to sell their products any longer. And so if you do have anything, which most of us would not, because they haven't been available to us for a while, you're not allowed to use them. And so again, you should turn any products into your local household hazardous waste site. So I again attempted to buy a product that is known to be restricted use. And so same with the neonicotinoids, the DPR and county ag commissioners will enforce the law. Retail stores should not be carrying these, and online retailers should not ship to California. These are not chlorphacinone and warfarin. This product contains strychnine, but I was able to find it, and had I wanted to buy it, they would have sent it to me. So there does need to be some more enforcement for online sales for some of these. But in general, we are not to use them, nor should we be able to access them through any online sales. So very, very quickly, because I do want to leave time for questions. These are further restrictions on materials. The neonicotinoids is brand new. Some of the rodenticides we haven't had access to for years anyway. But the neonicotinoids is going to be kind of a new thing for consumers. So we do have lots of information on what you can use instead, or what you can do instead, and that is integrated pest management. So we do have lots of different resources on the UCIPM website for these honeydew producers or chewing insects, where you can find out proper plant care and using biocontrol, managing ants that will actually keep the biocontrol away from their pest, and avoiding planting species that are very susceptible to honeydew producers. And then there's less toxic pesticides. We have a whole webinar on aphids, mealybugs, and scales. And so I don't have time to go into that now. We also do have whole webinars on IPM for rodents, rat management. And so without getting into that detail, there are other sustainable methods using IPM that you can control your rats with. So cultural controls, modify the habitat, don't make it favorable to the rodent, especially if it's around your house. Eliminate food and shelter, clean up an area that may harbor or provide hiding places, exclude them, use traps, and rely on natural predators. So we do have a lot of tools that we can have at our disposal. So our UCIPM website, here's our new homepage, if you haven't seen that yet. Same content, just a little different look. So that's our homepage. Here's our home garden, turf, and landscape pests, where you can find information on all kinds of different pests, insects, as well as rodents, and our pest note library, where we've got our insects, mites, mollusks, and nematodes, and then our birds, mammals, and reptiles. So all of our materials, we are modifying them to make sure that we note that the neonicotinoids has had a change. We do also have information on protecting natural enemies and pollinators using IPM. This is on our website. And then importantly, we have our pesticide active ingredient database that we have been updating. And just this morning, we added notes on use to reflect these two laws. So for all of the neonicotinoids, we have put a note about the new law that prohibits the use by anyone who's not licensed. And then for the rodenticides, we have put in the appropriate law language that points our users to the limitations of their use. And for all of our pesticides in our AI database, active ingredient database, we do have ratings on their potential hazards to the environment and to people, and especially to honeybees, which links to our bee precaution database that I don't have time to talk about today, and what it means. But while these notes are in our active ingredient database, as consumers, you will not have access to these products, nor should you use them. But we will continue to have this information on our website for anyone who wants to come and look, as well as for the licensed professionals that may still have access to these products. So if you do have a big tree that has a honeydew producer that is creating the big messy honeydew, you can call a licensed arborist, you can call a licensed pest control professional, as long as they are licensed in the category B. They can use neonicotinoids to help you manage your pest. But again, there's a lot of information on our website and in our webinars. These are the webinars I mentioned earlier. You can find these on our YouTube channel to help you know what other integrated pest management tools are available to manage these types of pests. And of course, we have our website. There's a lot of resources I was going to throw onto this slide, but we will send an email to all of you that are here today with links to read about the laws, also to our website, to our YouTube channel, and some other information to help you manage your pests and make sure that you are being a good steward of our environment and complying with these new laws and restrictions.
Yes, thank you, Karey, for that great webinar.